Perfect. Well, good afternoon all, and thank you for joining us here for this month's meeting for the Aquarium Pacific's Community Science program. I'm excited to see all of you guys here, and we have some speakers from Orange County Habitats, or OCH, and they're going to be talking to you guys about wetlands conservation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Stacy, and she's going to start talking.
Hi, everyone.
One more thing, my bad. For our volunteers, just remember that these meetings do count for volunteer hours, so you can either choose to start your clock right now, or at the end of the meeting, I'll let you know how long we've been on, and you can feel free to add your hours manually.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sean. I'm Stacy with OC Habitats. I'm the founder. We're about to have our 5-year anniversary this summer. Our organization is based on habitat conservation here in Orange County. We work on our big impetus is education. We're trying to educate the public, students all the way to adults, about the environment in general and our habitats in specific in Orange County. We also do restoration. We have several projects that we're working on, which we're going to talk about in this presentation. And we also do monitoring in the local habitats. Specifically right now, we're doing coastal dune monitoring. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. And we have 2 of our staff members here. We have Christina Robinson and Kim Yamul. I'll let Christina tell a little bit about herself.
Hi, very excited to be here. Thank you all for joining us today. My background is in marine biology from Cal State Long Beach. I worked a lot in the wetlands in that area and in Huntington and Newport as well. And I'm currently up at UC Santa Barbara working on my master's degree in environmental science and management.
Kim, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm another staff member at OC Habitats. I'm currently doing marine biology as well at Cal State Fullerton, where I'm planning to get my bachelor's degree.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I think everybody should be able to see the screen. Is there anyone that can? Sean, you can see it, right? All right, good. All right, so we're just going to get started. We have about an hour, and our presentation is not quite that long, but we'll have time for questions and discussion as we move along. So please feel free to throw that in the chat, raise your hand. I think Sean is going to be monitoring both of those. So we are happy to go a little deeper into a topic. We are going to have to really skim the surface on a lot of things that we do because we have a limited amount of time, but we hope that you'll find it very interesting, and you'll find if you are looking for opportunities beyond the aquarium that we might be able to provide those for you. So as I mentioned, we are OC Habitats. We one of the big things that we are doing is we are working in the local wetlands in Huntington Beach and in Newport. The Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy is where our partnership is. We've been working there since about 2019. We have, they have 4 marshes there. They have the Magnolia, Brookhurst, Talbert, and now Newland Marsh. The Newland Marsh is a newly acquired in the last 12 months. So right now they have different projects for each one, depending on what their status is, and also where their location, such as the Brookhurst Marsh has the direct inundation from the ocean. That's where a lot of the tidal influence comes in from. And then it flows through all the other marshes. So that one, there's different projects going on in each of them, and we are participating or helping in as much as we can in all of those. We also work in Upper Newport Bay. They're doing an Algerian sea lavender removal kind of everywhere around the bay. Newport Bay Conservancy is also doing it, but we have our own little plot of about a ½ acre. It's a mitigation site, and that's through the Metropolitan Water District. And that's been going on since the fall of 2020. So we kind of did the main removal, and now we're in the monitoring phase where we go out monthly or every other month to remove the ones that are popping up as the years. And it's a 5-year program. So we expect to be there another 3.5 to 4 years as we continue. There are other wetlands in Orange County, the Bolsa Chica ones, which I think when most people hear wetlands, that's the one they think of. It's the biggest one. It has the hiking trails around it. There's a lot. That one is really well used by many species, especially our migratory birds. We also have the San Joaquin wetlands, which is our freshwater marsh here on the coast. So that's in Irvine near UCI. And then we have some other freshwater in Anaheim. We have Fairview Park, we have vernal pools, which are rare. And I believe that's the only vernal pools we have in all of Orange County. There's a salt marsh in Anaheim Bay, which is near Long Beach area. And we have in Shipley Nature Center, there is one as well. And I believe that is a man-made because they divert the water into there. And then we have the Los Cerritos wetlands and Prado. Even though Prado isn't in Orange County, it is actually managed and owned by Orange County. So those are our wetlands that we are in the county. We don't work in all of them. We're not that big, so we picked 2, and that's what we're working on. So these maps kind of give an example of this is Huntington Beach. This picture here is Huntington Beach right on the coast. It's right across from it's right across from Magnolia, basically. So Huntington Beach State Park and the City Beach. And then this is the actual site, and this is Magnolia. And then down below is the Upper Newport Beach site that's right near the Muth Center. And that's where NBC is, their offices are situated. So we know that, I think this is Kim, actually.
So wetlands are basically lands that are saturated by water. There are 3 parameters that describe wetlands. One is that wetland hydrology, which is basically the movement of water in and out of a wetlands ecosystem. Wetlands habitats in general are either like submerged in water permanently or temporarily throughout the day. And the soil in here absorb a lot of water, which basically supports the vegetation in the area because these plants are adapted to living in saturated soil conditions. The second parameter is hydric soil, which is basically about how soil in wetlands are covered in water, and which means that they don't have as much oxygen on them. They have little to no oxygen on them. And then these 2 conditions contribute to basically the vegetation that are found on wetlands. We have hydrophytic vegetation, which means water-loving vegetation. These plants are adapted to wetlands where they don't get as much oxygen on the soil. And then next slide. So some importance of wetlands, one is that they provide habitat for native wildlife. Many animals rely on wetlands for food and other resources. And this is especially important during migration and breeding season, especially for birds that use wetlands like salt marsh as kind of like their stopover when they migrate from one place to another. The second one is wetlands improve water quality. Vegetation in wetlands are very good at absorbing water. They act as natural water filter because they absorb a lot of the nutrients and pollutants in the water. And this is especially important for water that comes from urbanized areas because those tend to have a lot of like chemicals on them. The third one is that wetlands help reduce floods and erosion. Vegetation slows down the flow of water by absorbing a lot of the water from runoff, like from ground surface. And then the fourth one is that they provide space for environmental education and public outreach. Wetland habitats in general, they show the connection between terrestrial and marine habitats. I think that in general, people tend to think that terrestrial and marine habitats are not that, we tend to like to segregate them, but in reality, like habitats like wetlands really like provide a connection between those two. And then last one is that they provide blue carbon, which means that they store carbon dioxide in vegetation and soil. And this is really important because there's a lot of carbon dioxide that's stored in soil, like in wetlands. And this is something that a lot of researchers over the past few years have been looking into in terms of using wetlands to help mitigate climate change issues. The next slide. So these are some of the species that we can find in wetlands. Something to keep in mind is that these are just examples. Wetlands in general are very productive environment, and they support a great deal of biodiversity in the habitats. The first one shows the ridgeways rail, and this is actually an endangered species of bird. We also have the Belding Savanna sparrow. Both of these birds are native to Orange County, and they are endangered. And they use this salt marsh plant called pickleweed, which you can see on the picture right here. It's this plant that looks like a segmented rod. Both of these birds, they hang out a lot close to pickleweed because that's where they basically forage their food. And then you also have the salt marsh bird's beak, which is a hemiparasitic plant, but it's a native plant. Next slide.
I want to add on the salt marsh bird's beak, it is actually an endangered species as well. So all three of these are endangered species on this slide. So I guess it's my turn. So some of the other species that we talked about, some endangered species just now, and there's even more. We have some species that use both the coastal dune habitat as well as the wetlands, and two of them are the western snowy plover and the California least tern. And these are the ones that you're more likely to see in the news in the recent years. Our snowy plovers are considered a species of special concern in California, and they're considered threatened federally. And the California least tern is considered federally endangered, and both federally and state endangered. So this is our snowy plover. I always tell people, if you cup your hand and you like just your single hand and close it, you could actually fit a snowy plover in your hand. That's how small they are. When we're teaching children, we always say they're like a hamster with wings, and they have those big eyes so that they can see their food very well, because they very much rely on their eyesight to catch their food, which is very small insects and arthropods that live in the rack, which is seaweed that washes ashore. They also are both nocturnal and diurnal, meaning that they sleep when they need to, and they're just up and down all day, not day and night. So they don't have one specific. As you can see, this guy is banded. So he was captured at one point, when he was a chick or if he was injured, and then we're following him. We follow them all along the state because we're trying to, obviously they're protected under the Endangered Species Act. So we're trying to make sure that they're coming around. So they are banded. We also have the least tern. They are harder to band. They are banded in some cases, but they are harder to band, and their bands are harder to read because they're much more of a flyer. Whereas the snowy plover is more of they fly, but their first instinct is to run versus to fly. So we have a better chance of actually spotting them, whereas the least tern is going to always fly up. They very rarely run away from you. So the least tern is also very small. This guy is actually carrying a fish. I don't know if you can see it. And this over here, this nest is a snowy plover nest. Least tern nests look very similar. They don't have any vegetation. They use shells and rocks and sand, and their eggs look a lot like just the surrounding habitat to protect them. So it's just a very barren. They both nest in very open areas. In both of these habitats, you can see the sand behind it. There's not a lot of vegetation. So their chicks in particular are very, their mortality rate is really high because they're very susceptible to predation. Let's see. Here we have, as we're talking about is the wetlands, the snowy plover and the least terns use the wetlands. We have nesting already. We have pairs that are nesting, snowy plovers that are nesting in the Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve in the areas that are not open to the public. And we're starting to see the terns. We have the EONS program called Eyes on the Nest Site through Bolsa Chica Conservancy. We're starting to monitor, and we're seeing behaviors of mating and courting. So that's happening. But we also have a lot of other species. As Kim said, this is a very productive habitat. It has a lot of environmental services, as well as provides a lot of home and food sources for many species. And this is one of them, which is our stingray. Hopefully it's not too choppy for you, but this was in the upper Newport Bay, right by the mitigation site that we're working on for the Algerian sea lavender. And he was just putzing around in that area. And we happened to get a good video of him. And there's many species that live there. We can get guitarfish, just a variety of different species. So that is our guy there. It's just another example. Sorry, I got to move out of this one. It's got to let me blink out of it. There we go. All right, and here we've got a variety of species. It's just another example of some of the different species. We have the legless, California legless lizard. We have the striped skunk. We have the coyote. We have the funnel weaver. We have, I'm going to forget this little mouse's, oh, it's a vole. This is the California vole. This is a garter snake, and I'm blanking on the specific name of it right now. And then this is the diamond turbot. So all these are just a sampling of the different types of animals that use this habitat. And that doesn't even get into the plant material. We actually didn't do a huge highlight of plants in this because I think we're going to run out of time. But it gives you an example of all the different animals that are using this habitat. This is a good time. We've run over some of the questions, some of the animals that live there. If anyone has any questions or comments, we certainly are welcoming to that. So we wanted to give you a few minutes to do that. No questions, so we can move on. All right, then we will. All right, I believe this is still me. Our work at Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy, as I mentioned, has 4 different marshes there. We're working with John Villa, who's the executive director of that particular project. As I mentioned, they just acquired Newland, the Newland marsh, which is heavily degraded. It really just looks like almost like a dirt patch. So that is going to have a lot of work ahead of it. But the Huntington Beach is really nice. It's the only wetland in Orange County that is privately owned. Everything else is managed or owned by the state. So this is really, what is nice about this is, when they buy it, the land is theirs, and it allows them to do a lot. It gives them a lot of flexibility as to how they can restore it. And so that's what we're doing, is we're restoring it. We're removing non-native and invasive species. We have 2 of them here. We have a sea rocket plant here, and we have a variety of ice plant, the crystalline ice plant. Both of these are very invasive. We're always teaching our students that non-native is not always great. That we always say all plants are good in their own habitat where they belong. So wherever sea rocket, first started in Europe, it has a home there. It belongs there. It's not a bad plant. But when it comes over somewhere else where it has nothing that's keeping it contained, then it becomes a problem because it becomes invasive, pushing other plants out, decreasing biodiversity, and therefore, really making the habitat less habitable. So that's one of the things we do, is removing these different plants. Ice plant, we probably have 8 different varieties in California that are all non-native. At one point, probably in the mid 1950s or so, Caltrans was planting ice plant, not this particular one, but another one. They actually call it the Caltrans ice plant because they were planting it all along the freeways as a soil stabilizer, not realizing that it was super invasive, and have come to find out not only is it super invasive, but it really is not a great soil stabilizer, because it holds so much water in its leaves and roots that when the soil becomes saturated, it actually causes more likely to have a landslide with a plant, that particular plant on it, because it just weighs, it just pulls with the water instead of actually making, if the roots are shallow enough, it just really doesn't hold everything in place as they thought it would. So our other part of our work is that we are planting native species. So when we remove non-native, we don't just leave it blank unless we have a specific project. So in Upper Newport Bay, when we're removing the Algerian sea lavender, we actually are just letting nature take its course and hopefully fill in with the native stuff that's important, which Kim mentioned. The pickleweed is a super important plant that's in the wetlands that a lot of species rely on. But also the California sea lavender is native, and that is one that we like to fill in. The Belding Savannah sparrow actually uses the pickleweed, and the California as a perch when it's looking for a mate. So it's really important for us to make sure that those plants can be there so that that listed species can use it. We also have the ridgeway rail that uses that habitat as well, and they rely heavily on the pickleweed as well. We work with partners. Sometimes when there's an endangered species, such as the salt marsh furred beak, we actually work with permitted people, because whenever you have an endangered plant or animal, permits are required to have any kind of coming within any kind of a parameter of it, or even, you know, touch it or whatever. So whether it's a bird or a plant, we have to work with permitted people. Our group has decided that we can't get permitted for every animal we want to work with, so we just work with people that have permits. And then we have, with all of our restoration programs, we always have a aspect of education. That's kind of our thing, is that we educate. We don't just have people come out and work and not know why they're doing it. We try to really make sure people understand why they're doing it, why it's important, and hopefully, you know, they walk away with some new knowledge, whether they keep it for themselves or they share it with others or they keep coming back. We hope all of those are the case, but that's our motto, is, you know, education is kind of the king and queen in the environmental movement. I think this one might be Christina.
Yes. Okay, so impacts to wetlands. So unfortunately, we have quite a few impacts. As Stacy just mentioned, some of those non-native plant species that become introduced can kind of outcompete the native plants that we have. This really disrupts a lot of our biodiversity. These non-native species are just really good at being successful in these areas that unfortunately they're not home to. So sometimes you may see some plants referred to as invasive species. So that's what that term means. And oftentimes it's from our water runoff that's actually carrying these plant seeds and introducing them into these wetland habitats. Another issue that we have is encroachment and fragmentation due to urbanization. So wetlands are surrounded by a lot of human-made structures like roads and buildings and different barriers like that. We see that this then reduces the habitat, which also, again, harms the overall biodiversity in the ecosystem. This is a really big issue with our wetlands, especially across the state of California. You know, we used to have all of our coastal areas being these wetlands and estuaries, and because of development, we've lost like over 90% of our wetlands that we used to have. So another great reason to come out and help restore these habitats. They're so important and so helpful, and we got to protect the ones that we have left. Another issue that we have is pollution. So unfortunately, this can be chemical and biological pollution, which can damage these ecosystems. So oftentimes that can be things like motor oil, if we're not careful when we're changing that in our cars, if we're not responsible after pet waste when we're walking them, right? That is all going to go down our storm drains anytime it rains or anytime we're overwatering. All of that waste, whatever is on the street, any of that pollution will go down those storm drains and oftentimes directly into some of these wetlands because they are the end of the watershed for some of these areas. Other pollution, of course, is trash, plastic, anything that's going to be, you know, that you see on the edge of the highway, oftentimes in that ice plant that Stacy mentioned earlier. Any of that trash in the street, again, anytime it's windy, rainy, we're overwatering is going to end up there. And then, of course, we also have particulate matter pollution coming from our exhaust pipes in our vehicles. That can also have quite an impact. And so a huge impact that this pollution has is on the water quality and the ecosystem services that this habitat provides. So these contaminants that are carried in this runoff pollution can really overwhelm our wetland areas. They can, you know, oftentimes devastate and kill different plants and animals and all the different microbes or microorganisms that live in that soil and in that mud, which then ultimately leads to less effective water filtration too. But there's lots of things that we can do to help prevent a lot of these things. So making sure we're not adding fertilizer on plants before it's going to rain. We know those chemicals are then going to get washed away. Being responsible with when we wash our vehicles, either taking it to a place that can capture that water and reuse it, or trying to wash our vehicles like on the lawn, on the grass, instead of just the concrete where it's going to roll off. And, you know, picking up our trash and keeping things clean. Additionally, I'm sure you all heard about the oil spill that happened in Huntington Beach in October of 2021. This unfortunately closed all beaches in Orange County and San Diego for multiple weeks, with over 100 bird and mammal species that were affected. And with affected, this could have been either injured or killed from the oil spill. We also had people reporting tar balls all the way through December 31st and even into 2022. So these phone numbers here, we have the Cal OES State Warning Center. For any time you see a tar ball, please call that number. And then this is in purple, the Oiled Wildlife Hotline. So this is in case you come across maybe a bird that looks like it's been covered in oil. We do have a great response team out there and network in California to help our species and keep the beach clean after this incident happened.
All right, I'm back. So we were talking about Huntington Beach a minute ago, and now we're talking to Upper Newport Bay, which I think I kind of explained already, but that area is managed by the City of Newport, OC Parks, and CDFWs, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Project GROW is a subsidiary of California Coastal Commission. They don't control the property, but they are, this particular group is commissioned to do many projects within the Upper Newport Bay, and it's run by Matt Yurko. And we've been working with them for, like, we started doing the mitigation on the site in 2020, but we've been doing restoration, other projects with Project GROW probably about a year before that. So we've been working with them since about 2019. Most of their projects in that area are mitigation related. And I think that's partly because of well, money. Money comes down from these different mitigations, and it pays for the, you know, and the services that are happening. And then also it's very strict as far as timeline. When you have a mitigation, you need to get certain things done by a certain amount of time, and then you monitor for a certain number of years, and you know, it's supposed to satisfy the mitigation requirements. So we work very hard and diligently in these sites in a way that is methodical, so that, you know, things are getting done in the time. The pandemic really threw a wrench in some of that, because many of the projects, including the one that we worked on here with the Algerian sea lavender, was, you know, people didn't want to come out even if it was outside, and we were able to have small groups start the project. Obviously 2020, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and we were still able to get out there and really make an impact. So we're thankful for that. And also, so you can see this was kind of the beginning of the project. It was actually much worse than this, but you can see this is the Algerian sea lavender here dotting in front of our worker Michaela, and all of that is gone now. You know, like I said, we go back and we pick the stragglers, and you'd be so surprised how, you know, as often as we go, we come back the next month and there's a big one. We're like, how did we miss this? But that's why we keep going back. So as they grow, we catch them, and we're really trying to catch them before their seeding season, which their seeding season's a little later than a traditional other plants. So right now, you know, we're in front of it. They will seed out in the summer. So we're trying to get ahead of it so we don't continue to have seed droppings, because when we went out there, there was so much out there, and we already know there was a ton of seed that fell. So that's what we're picking up now, is all those seeds that have are growing out there. And so there's a section back here kind of where this person in black is. That's a really bad area that we're still really trying to tackle. And they're so tiny. You feel like you're out there for 2 or 3 hours and you barely, you know, fill a bag, but you actually took like 500 plants out, but they're so small, it seems like nothing, but it actually is important. So we call it passive restoration because we are not planting anything there. And we have noticed since we've removed this Algerian sea lavender that other plants, like one of the heaths, which is a native plant, is starting to fill in. We're noticing the California sea lavender is definitely doing much better, and so is the pickleweed and saltwort out there. So it's working in the way we want it to. We're not seeing salt marsh birdsby, because that would be the one that, like, oh, we should have this out here, but we're kind of hoping it will find its way into this section. And they might at some point say, okay, if it isn't coming on its own, we might end up planting at some point, but right now that is not the plan. So yeah, so this is one that we're just, like I said, this is ongoing. We'll be working on this for the next 4 years or so. All right, I think that's Christina.
Okay, so I'm sure many of you are already familiar with iNaturalist and the app, but just in case you're not, iNaturalist is a super, super cool and helpful and useful and resourceful app. You're able to record your observations with your phone, so you can take a photo of an insect, an animal, a plant, anything you're curious about, wondering what the identification is. And then on the app, it's shared with other naturalists, and many of these people are, experts in the field that are able to identify these. And then you can, discuss where you saw it. The app is great because it's taking those GPS coordinates, so you know the exact location. You can then actually see on the map where other species like that may exist, or just other species in the area that you're at, to learn more about the area. If you're on a hike, if you're doing some restoration work and you want to know what a certain plant is, or maybe an insect, or anything like that. So super, super cool. I've learned a lot from using iNaturalist personally, and it's really been helpful with different areas of work, whether it's been with school, academically, or other volunteer opportunities or work opportunities when trying to figure out what you're looking at. So yeah, do you want to chime anything in, Stacy?
Yeah, this particular slide is actually stuff that I've done, we work in a variety of habitats. That's why I always say, our name is OC Habitats with an S, because there's multiple habitats in Orange County, and we're in a lot of them. So there's plants in particular. Botany is a really difficult field. There are so many plants, and insects as well. Not that mammals and reptiles are not, but there's so many, and they're so small and they're hard to see if you don't always have binoculars on hand, and you don't, you're not a botanist, it's super helpful. And I have used this quite a lot, and it is really nice to, you can put a guess out there. I think it's this. And then someone will correct you if they think it's wrong. And actually, that's been really helpful, because then they correct you and you can go back and go, oh, I see now. But being that, like this crab here, I thought it was a Dungeness crab. And then they correct me and said it was a graceful rock crab. And I didn't ever even heard of a graceful rock crab. So that was really great, because it wasn't something that I would have ever guessed. I wouldn't have gone there. And then this berry saltbush, we have a lot of coastal dune plants, and we have kind of a handful that we know they're always there. And this one was a little bit different. So I wanting, like, which one is this? And so it's been really helpful as our organization is, developing guides and things for our leaders, and also because our leaders educate others. So this has been really incredibly helpful. And then I see there's a couple of questions in here. It says, do you have a closer up picture of Algerian sea lavender in California? I do, but it's not on the slide, just so you know. They are very different looking though. And when we have people go out with us, we definitely train. Anytime we have a new group, we always train on, so you can identify the two, but once you see them, you're like, oh yeah, well, they're definitely look different. And then there's another question. It says, do you have internships for high school students? I work with homeschool students with flexible schedules that are very interested in conservation and science work. We have a next gen, we're actually gonna talk about volunteering in a second. So I'm gonna hold off on that for a second, and we'll get back to that question. Did anyone have any questions about iNaturalist before we move off of this? And you can unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. It's totally fine. Okay, then we'll move on. All right. Christina, were you going to do this one?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so some of our volunteer opportunities, we have educational programs, we have habitat monitoring programs, different administrative work too that we always could use more help and more creativity with. But of course, we have regular restoration volunteer opportunities every month. You can sign up for these restoration events through Eventbrite. You can also go to our website, ochabits.org, and sign up to receive our newsletter, which will also kind of share our monthly events that we have going on and other volunteer opportunities for the month, because some of that will change seasonally, like with Earth Month or, depending on what's going on. And so our next restoration event will actually be tomorrow, May 7th at Upper Newport Bay. And then our second restoration will be May 21st at the Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy. So again, you can sign up to register for those volunteer opportunities through Eventbrite.
I think we have a correction. Our restoration is not tomorrow, but it's next week. It's the 14th. So it's usually the second Saturday in Newport and the third Saturday in Huntington. So hopefully that date tomorrow is not out there somewhere, because we're not going to be there. So the question was about high school interns. We do have a program called our Next Gen, where and we're kind of transitioning it. We've had some interns from high school. We have found that it sometimes is maybe more than they can handle for their schedules in high school. They're getting ready for college and stuff. But we definitely have programs where they can volunteer or do our Next Gen program where they're shadowing us and learning about our organization and the work that we do. And while they're doing all these things with us, they're learning about obviously each environment and each habitat that we're working in. So we absolutely do have opportunities, and we'd love to talk to, I think it's Anne. We can talk to you more about that afterwards if you'd like. And yeah. All right. And so that is basically our presentation. And this is the time for us to discuss any of the things that we talked about. If you wanted to learn more, I could actually see if I could find a picture of the Algerian and the California while we discuss, if I could find it quick enough. So if everybody can unmute themselves if they'd like, and we can just have an open discussion about, your questions and or your comments. Julie Decker has her hand up.
Hi, I think you said there were 3 components of wetlands, and there was like soil, hydrology, and what was the third?
Vegetation. Okay,
thank you. I'm just taking notes.
Yeah, so the vegetation has to be able to live inundated in water. There's 2 different types. Our freshwater has to be able to live inundated in water most of the time. And our saltwater has to not only be inundated in water, but also deal with the salt content and be able, no animal or plant really can live with a lot of salt. So they have to have a way of getting rid of it. So most of the saltwater marshes have plants that have adaptations that can flush out the salt or get rid of it in a way that doesn't harm them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Kim, you're posting some pictures, but they're not showing up. So I'd have to unshare my screen. So let me just share this last thing so you guys can get some information, and then I can stop sharing, and then we can, Kim, you can share your pictures. So here's some information about our organization. We're so thankful that you guys joined us today. We hope that you learned something. I know we went over this information very quickly, and there's certainly a lot to talk about. You can reach out to us at och@ochabitats.org, or our website at ochabitats.org, or any of the Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even LinkedIn at OC Habitats. And this QR code is a way that takes you right to our website if you want to, look at it with your phone. And I'm going to stop sharing, so that if anybody wants to share any pictures of anything, that would be great. Are we good to turn it off, or do you guys need a minute or two to look at this?
I think Anne has another question in chat.
And my daughter is curious what your college majors were, as she plans for future planning because she's interested in environmental marine naturalist work. I am going to let both Christina and Kim answer that.
Hi, Anne. You can let your daughter know. So I actually, I went to Golden West College first, community college, and then transferred to Cal State Long Beach because I wanted to pursue marine biology. So they do have a great program for that. With where they're located at as well, there's the Los Cerritos wetlands nearby, and then, Bolsa Chica, Huntington, and Newport just south of there. And so during my time there, I was able to get a lot of great volunteer and internship experience working in the wetlands. There's a lot of great orgs in the area. that were helpful with just, sharing information on conservation, learning about that in school. And then, just trying to really, I can't highlight volunteering enough for this field and in conservation work. That's how you meet wonderful people from these amazing organizations. You get really incredible, like hands-on experience that teaches you how to identify species, take care of them, kind of manage things that you should incorporate when it comes to kind of conservation planning, so to speak, or any type of restoration work, like for the specific habitat you're trying to restore and conserve. And then I mentioned earlier, I'm currently a graduate student, so I'm specifically trying to learn more about coastal marine resource management here at the Bren School of UC Santa Barbara. So just trying to learn more about different ways of data analysis, like coding. What are you going to do with all this data? How do you visualize that? How do you share that information with the public and with policymakers and other stakeholders and things like that? So just something for her to maybe think about when she's kind of out there in the field, what she wants to do in the future and how she can like best plan for that.
All right, Kim, do you want to go over your path that you've taken?
Yeah, so right now I'm currently doing my 5th year and I'm still an undergrad, but I'm part of a research lab, and that's really helping me kind of figure out what I want to do as a career. I do a lot of field work in my lab, so that's helped me figure out that I actually like field work, and that's what I want to do for my career path. Also, like what Christina said about volunteering, like it gives you a lot of hands-on experience about things like conservation and stuff like that. And that's something that I thought was really important for me, because when I switched my major to bio, it was during COVID, so everything was online. So being part of OCH and doing fieldwork like restoration and stuff like that really helped me figure out like what I want to do. So yeah.
So you'll find with the environmental field, it's very intersectional. There's a lot of things that go on with environment. I mean, every space that you're in is an environment, whether it's indoor or outdoor. So you'll find there's so many, different things that cross over. So I have an undergrad in business, and I have my graduate in environmental. And I have many of our interns are either ecological, they've been marine biologists, I've had some anthropologists. So there's a lot of factors that affect the environment. There's plants, which are botanists. We've got, birds, ornithologists. We have anthropology for humans. We have policy. We have science and policy, environmental policy. We have a lawyer on our board who is trying to be more focused in environmental law. So there's a lot of focuses you can have in the environmental field that will benefit the many things that are considered in environment. There's soil, there's chemical, environmental chemical stuff, so there's so many levels that it depends on where your interests are. We even need, for a nonprofit like ours, we need managers, right? We need people that can do administrative work, that know how to run a business. That's an important part of environmental too, is, we can't just go out and all do field work. Someone's got to pay for it. So there's a process there behind it. Grant writing and all sorts of things. So education, we look for people that are interested in education. So teachers, so there's a lot of places you can come from and get into the environmental field and be a part of it. So I think I always feel like it's so wide open. You just have to decide where your passion is and where you want to put your energy and where you think your skills are, your passion and your skills together, and then push it forward into a place. So, and I think, Sean, if you could have Kim as a co-host, I think she was going to share the Algerian versus the California, just to show a comparison, because someone was asking about that.
I think I have access.
Yeah, she should be able to share now.
Awesome.
Okay. So this is the non-native and invasive Algerian sea lavender. This is the plant that we pull out whenever we do restoration work at UNB. And then I don't have a picture of the California one, but that one usually it doesn't have as many leaves on it, or like, because this one has really like, it's very, so it almost looks very dense compared to the California sea lavender one.
Yeah, the California sea lavender has longer, more elongated leaves. And I've noticed when I'm out there, the flowers on the Algerian is a bunch of stalks. So a bunch of stalks are coming out of the base, and then it has this flowering, the top. Whereas the California has more like one stem that branches out like a tree. Now, it doesn't always have one. Sometimes it has two or three, but it's far less than the Algerian. So I feel like it's fairly obvious. I'm trying to look up a picture that I can share. So we can't put them side by side because we're on different screens, but I can pop off right now and I will show you the California. I have lots of pictures, they weren't in here. So hold on one second. Here's a good example. So can you guys see my screen where there's 3 pictures? Yeah, so you can see compared to the one that Kim just showed you, the leaves are much longer and more elongated. They're not as dark green, and they're just more spread out. It's not such, I always think of the Algerian almost like a pom-pom. If you were to put a bunch of yarn together and tie a knot, it kind of makes this really tight, grouping of leaves, where this one's a little bit more spread out. And as I said, this one doesn't show the stem right here, but generally there's 1 or 2 stems and then it kind of branches out like a tree. So that's an example. But like I said, we definitely, when we take people out, we make sure that it's very clear which one's which, so that we're not taking out the wrong one. But when you see them side by side, they look clearly different. So does anyone else have any other questions about our work or volunteering or the wetlands?
Yeah, I actually have a really quick question. So you mentioned that you do both terrestrial and marine habitats. Do you do any monitoring within intertidal or like near coastal environments? So like docks or anything that are like heavily trafficked by like marine vessels or anything?
No, we do not. So right now our main monitoring is on coastal dune habitats, which is basically the beaches. And we're looking for pretty much anything that's going on there, but we go from this where the sand begins to as far out as we can see on the water, but we don't typically go on to a pier because that's not what we're looking for. We're really looking for kind of who's using the beach. However, we are in discussion with a woman that wants us to potentially do some monitoring in the intertidal zone. We're just still talking about that because like I said, we're very small, so we have to make sure we have enough people to cover an additional monitoring project. So, but I know that, there's a variety of different groups that do different things. I've heard about some dock ones before, but the ones that we're looking, I think, Christina, was it limpet, or remind me the species that we're dealing with Nancy with?
Purple urchins, and then also pismo clams is another one she
Right.
just looking at.
And I know Laguna Ocean Foundation is doing the limpet survey, right?
I'm not sure if they actively do it with any educators, like during tide pool education, but they have a lot of educators that help monitor with the limpets program. And that is across the entire state of California.
Right. Yeah. So we thought about doing that at one point, but again, we're just small, so we haven't been able to. When you do a program like that, you have to have a consistent set of volunteers. You can't just have new people every time. Otherwise, the leadership has to be at every event. And so in order for us to have a program like that, we have to make sure we have enough people that are committed to doing it kind of at least for, 6 months to a year, so that we're not constantly having to train a new person every single time we go out. So that's been one of the reasons why we didn't pursue it. And we are thinking about this other one. And, we just have to develop it out and make sure we have enough people. There is another program out there too, when Christina used to be with OC Coastkeepers, and they do a marine, an MPA watch, a marine protected area watch. And that is basically a coastal walk. and you're looking for kind of impacts. You're just looking for all sorts of impacts and human, anything that humans create, which is, walking, but dogs, trash, boats, bikes, all sorts of things. And we were trying to put those together with our regular monitoring program, but we found that their segments didn't quite match up with our segments. So it actually made it really challenging. So we were like, oh, this program actually needs to stand alone and not be combined with our other program. And we just, again, haven't had enough volunteers to start a whole new project to do it. But there's a lot of things that can be monitored out there for sure.
Awesome, thank you. And I think Julie also has a question.
Yeah, I see it. I have an iNaturalist question about captive and cultivated items. So what's the question specifically?
So in iNaturalist, when you enter something, there's a choice, is it captivated or cultivated? So if I'm entering a native plant that I have planted, I have not been checking that as a cultivated plant. But
yeah,
if
I would
it's
think that's probably a captive because it's native, but it's just in your backyard, versus cultivated, I think is non-native, and it's something you bought at the nursery, and it's not necessarily supposed to be in your backyard. It's not the right habitat for it. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not 100% sure on those definitions. Christina, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I actually haven't experienced that myself with iNaturalist, so I need to investigate that.
I will say that my daughter did, she's a freshman in college now, but last year or the year before, she had to do a project where she had to ID all the plants in our backyard, and she was doing a transect. Actually, it wasn't all of them. She did a transect and she had to note all the plants. And so I used iNaturalist because, I've lived in my house 20 years and plants have been there, and I'm like, I don't remember what that one is. And so we were going through and I was using iNaturalist, and I kind of got a swat on the hand from them because they said, you're not supposed to be putting, non-native stuff in here from your backyard. This is supposed to be, out in the wild. And I had to explain myself what I was doing and why I was doing it. And they were okay with it. They just said, if you're going to do that, you need to tell them that's what you're doing. Kind of saying, hey, I'm trying to figure out what's in my backyard or whatever, versus just putting it in like it's, because I think they interpret it as that you saw this in the wild. And so they want to know if it's not, if you're not out doing a hike and trying to, figure out wild plants and you're in your own backyard, they just want to know. I think they're okay with you doing it as long as you're clear about what it is that you're doing.
Okay, because okay, go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I can add on to this. So I'm a site curator for iNaturalist, and the captive cultivated function is, so the general idea is if you have planted that there intentionally, like if you had any role in establishing that plant or that animal in that particular place, that would be captive or cultivated. And that's the same thing for, sometimes people will test observations of animals in zoos or aquariums or pets. That would also fall under captive or cultivated. But if you are, let's say, part of like a environmental like conservation group and you're outplanting native plants, that would not be cultivated because that's being actively put back into the wild. But if it's, your backyard or like a nursery or something, then that would be cultivated. So it kind of depends on the context. And I don't know if you have my email or not, but if you would like to send me your observation links, I could be more than happy to take a look at them.
Okay, so a lot of what I've been doing is part of the AOP project, the science project. So for instance, we planted on the rooftop garden at the watershed, we put some native plants. So I took some pictures of them, put them on iNaturalist. Now I wouldn't have put those as captive or cultivated, but yet we planted them. Would you consider them captive?
I would say that they're captive personally, only because they're on the aquarium's property. And the reason I say that is because it's a very small sort of like habitat fragment. It's not entirely part of like I guess it is part of like holistically the environment, but it's in a very small region, and it's kind of limited to that one particular space. So I would personally say that it was captive. But yeah, that one is definitely a little bit trickier.
Okay, what about when I went to Los Cerritos Wetlands and I took pictures of some of them, which is part of that habitat restoration? They're obviously planted but they're native plants. So how would you call that?
That in that case, I would say that that would not be captive because it's being put back into its native habitat.
Okay.
So Sean, this is how I gather what you just said is basically captive and cultivated is on private property, like something, you know, whether it's a business or a home. Obviously Huntington Beach Wetlands is private, but it is a wild land, so that's different. But in most cases, it's going to be a private versus wild, you know, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. I know there are also probably some links on the iNaturalist site. I can't find them at the moment that kind of go into detail about the differences between captive and cultivated. And I think they've made some videos on that. If I can find the links, I'll post them in the chat. But yeah, for the most part, I think that sums it up. If it's part of, I guess, private property that's not a wild space, it would be considered captive or cultivated.
Right. I'm looking at the iNaturalist site right now, and it says check captive and means that the observation is an organism that exists in the time and place it was observed because humans intended it to be there then and there. Likewise, wild and naturalized organisms exist in particular times and places because they intended to do so. They meaning the plant. So it's humans versus plants, but that, like you said, when we're doing a restoration in a wild space, you know, obviously we're assisting, but it's supposed to be there. So we're putting something back that's supposed to be there already. So I think that's the difference.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so here's a link I'll post in the chat. If you scroll down to point 18, it'll talk about captive and cultivated observations, and then you can read up a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it gives them a good example, so that's good. Thanks, Sean. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions or anything you want to add? Obviously, we had to really skim over some of the wetlands, and we didn't even go into a lot of the plants that are in wetlands. But if you want to have more, I know that we're almost out of time. We only have a few more minutes, but if anyone has anything else to add.
Is this all volunteer or are there any paid positions?
For OC Habitat, so we're primarily volunteer. We have a few part-time positions, but very limited. So we have a very, very small budget for staffing.
Okay.
Anybody else? So if anyone's interested in signing up to be on our mailing list just to know what we're doing, as I can put this back up, or you can check our website out at ochabitats.org, which I just put there. And if you go to I think it's Get Involved, there's a section on you can, Ty has our application for volunteering, our application for internships and board member. We're not actually seeking any board members at this time, but that's a place that if you're interested in joining us. As far as the mailing list, you can put your, you can also join our mailing list through the website, or you can put your email here and we'll copy it and we'll put you on in the system. You just put your name and your email if you want it, because then we put it in. We use MailChimp and we have to put your name and your email. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for letting us talk to you about what we do. We really love what we do and feel like we're making an impact, even if it's small. We're a small organization and we're in a small county, but we're trying to make as big of an impact as possible. And part of that is the education part of it, really getting out there. We do, like I said, a lot of education. We didn't really go into that very much, but we go to schools, we're talking to kids, and we have a very good internship program, mostly focused on college students. So really getting them some experience in the field and with nonprofits, and hopefully getting them, the next advocates for our environment as we move forward. So again, thank you for your time, and we appreciated your questions and comments.
Thank you.
Real quick, could you put your email, Sean?
Yeah, let me put that.
I always forget yours. I have your other one, but I don't have this one. And you're not very good at responding to the old ones. I don't blame you.
There we go. It should be that one. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna be sending you something.
Perfect. But yeah, I'd like to thank Christina, Stacy, and Kim for joining us and talking about their work with wetlands conservation. Again, if you have any questions for them, feel free to visit their website at ochhabitats.org or send them an email. Would you guys mind dropping that email in the chat? And if you have any questions about the presentation, about the program, or just for myself in general, you can send me an email at aopinaturalist@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to take a look at that as well. But with that, if we don't have any questions, I'd like to remind all of our volunteers that these meetings do count for volunteer hours. So we've been on for about an hour, so feel free to either stop your clock or to enter those in manually. I will see you all next month.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Happy Mother's Day to everyone.
Thank you.
Fantastic meeting.